Hello, and you're listening to Booth Talk from the After Movie Diner. And on this episode, we're very happy to have director and writer Robert D. Krzykowski, who is the man behind The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot, starring Sam Elliott, which is a fantastic new film coming out on February 8th, 2019 in the US. You'll hear us review that on the regular After Movie Diner podcast next week, but have a listen to this fantastic interview with Robert Krzykowski all about the film, how the film came together, and exactly what the film means, because although it has the schlocky kind of B-movie title, which everyone loves, and a fantastic sort of throwback painted poster, actually there's a lot more depth lurking behind The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot than you might expect. We get into that and a lot more in this coming interview. Please enjoy.
Hi, John.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much for being on the After Movie Diner today. So The Man Who Killed Hitler and the Bigfoot, and Then the Bigfoot, my apologies, is your debut feature film as a director. Tell me how that script came together, and was this an idea you've kind of long been working on, or a relatively new work?
It was a script that I wrote a little over 12 years ago, probably pushing 13 or so now. And yeah, it was in development for a lot of years, and it hit a lot of walls along the way. And over time, we kind of gathered this really incredible team of people around it, including John Sayles and Douglas Trumbull and Sam Elliott and Lucky McKee. But it started off as kind of a pulp adventure story. I wanted to do almost like a James Bond or an Indiana Jones type movie, but with more of a Norman Rockwell type character, almost a Mr. Rogers type guy if he were forced into acts of violence. And I thought there could be something interesting about exploring a character like that.
So how did those people kind of come on board? Obviously, you've got that fantastic cast headed up by Sam Elliott. You mentioned Douglas Trumbull there, who's obviously a legendary effects pioneer. Sort of how did this script kind of gain that support and then move into production?
I mean, it took so many years that those are much longer stories. But the simple thing is they had a background in illustration and journalism, and I had been writing for some time, kind of script doctor work and on my own screenplays, and then I got into producing almost by accident when Lucky McKee brought a film to Massachusetts, and they needed somebody on the ground that could kind of put it together and had some experience in film and filmmaking. And so, like I said, over time, these people kind of gravitated toward it, and they had seen a short film that I'd made called Elsie Hooper, based on my comic, which is full life-size puppets shot in a super wide 2.55 frame, very noir. And John was interested in the idea of that short before it was even made, and he came on board as an executive producer for that. And then when Doug actually saw that short, he wanted to talk to me about visual effects and film. I met with him, and then he asked what I wanted to do next, and I told him about The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then the Bigfoot, and he was really interested and curious about that. And once he read the script, I think he became protective of it and wanted to see that script come to life. So that's kind of the simple story of how everything came together.
Yeah, and although obviously sort of from the title and even the poster, and like you say, it has kind of pulp novel beginnings, it has sort of obvious B-movie leanings, but a lot of the subject matter is written and played very straight, with some wonderful ideas woven in there about aging and heroism, war and myths and legends and so on. Talk about kind of writing those ideas into it, I imagine, especially once you kind of got someone like a Sam Elliott on board, and then getting the cast, once you rounded the cast out, to kind of play it straight and go with the subject matter in that vein.
Well, in the very beginning of writing the script, my wife and I, she was my girlfriend at the time, and we had kind of faced some personal losses in our life, and I started basically just trying to write something that answered some of these questions about loss and regret and wishing that you had said and done things that you could have when you had a chance, and then those opportunities being gone forever. And I thought that Calvin Barr could be kind of an avatar for those feelings. And so the whole entire script and the approach to it changed very, very early on, where I pulled the two timelines apart and started writing about an older man looking backwards over his life, and trying to make some sense out of his own mythology and then adding to it as we go. And then it's really about the small little moments in his life that really matter. These big gigantic things that he does are almost incidental.
Yeah. And obviously sort of us B-movie genre fans have always known that these often derided sort of cinematic films from way back can actually talk way more about kind of societal issues and human themes than most so-called Oscar films, to be honest. Are you a fan of genre film? And if so, kind of what films and what period influenced this, if any at all? Or was it more novel?
I mean, a lot of novels had a big influence on it, but John Sayles said early on that he saw this film as kind of a Trojan horse for bigger ideas, and he said that that's kind of always what science fiction and fantasy have done, is they've been kind of a vessel for the ideas of who we are and where we're going. And I have a vast movie collection, and I mean, I could go on and on about the movies that I have that are genre movies and that are fantastic movies that go into science fiction and going way back, and ultimately they all had an influence in one way or another, but the biggest influences were things like The Old Man and the Sea, John Steinbeck novels, Moby Dick, and then a few movies that had a big influence would have been Being There by Hal Ashby.
Oh, that's fantastic.
The Natural, as a book and as a movie, and the book and the movie have different tones. The book has a much more brutal tone as it kind of reveals what it's meant to be. And I thought that the way that Bernard Malamud presents this hero and then deconstructs him was something that was really interesting to me. So there was a lot of different influences. And then Universal monster movies, the Bigfoot, I really wanted to be kind of a classic movie monster, and I didn't want it to be overly affected by CG. And I have no problem with CG. I think the Planet of the Apes movies, the new ones, are some of the best creature work of all time, and I think there's a place for that. But in this movie, set in 1987, that with flashbacks to the 1940s, it just felt appropriate that the creature be a man in a suit, and that be a real actor, and that was Mark Steger, who played the Demogorgon in Stranger Things, and the creature team was Spectral Motion, led by Mike Elizalde, and they'd done Hellboy and a lot of other creature features. So there's a lot of disparate elements pulling this one together.
And actually, once you kind of got to production with this cast, with the special effects team in place, and also shooting in Massachusetts, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, shooting in Massachusetts was an incredible benefit to us, because all of the locations in the entire film are about 10 minutes from my front door. So everything was very, very close and very accessible, and then we could amplify it with matte paintings and miniatures and some old school effects, and then some kind of hidden new effects, which were done by Sandbox Effects here in Massachusetts. And that was all being overseen by Douglas Trumbull's old creative partner, Richard Urasich, who was our visual effects supervisor, and figured out methods to tell the story in the best way possible and still be able to get the scope out of some of these big punchy moments. So being in Massachusetts was terrific, because I knew the locations, I knew where they were, and I knew how we'd be able to pull that off. And then our line producer, who became our executive producer, Louise Lovegrove, and our first AD, Elaine Gibson, came in and very much structured the shoot in a way that we'd just barely be able to pull off everything that we were going for without having to sacrifice any quality or any page count or any days beyond the 25 that were allotted to us.
Yeah. And obviously there's a lot of things about the film that kind of go against the grain of modern filmmaking, obviously having a much older leading protagonist, having a lot of practical effects, shooting in America even for what must have been not a particularly huge budget film. Shooting in America can also be rare nowadays. Were there any areas that you got a lot of pushback on that you had to kind of fight for in terms of putting the film together? Or was it because you had this, like you say, you put this team together over so long that actually you kind of all insulated yourselves and were able to move forward?
Well, I'd say probably 10 of those 12 years making the movie were spent just fully in kickback and pushback and people saying, what are you trying to do? I don't understand this.
Yeah.
People that would link up with it and they kind of hoped it would become this more exploitive, nutty thing. And then they would see that I wasn't relenting and then they'd give up on it. And over time, that team very slowly came together and then they all kind of created a wall around it to make it, to protect it. And it was when Sam Elliott decided that he wanted to be a part of this and stars Calvin Barr that the movie really launched forward in the 7 or 8 months that it took to get it off the ground once Sam was on board. So that was the real propellant that made the movie happen was I'd say John Sayles coming on board, Lucky McKee, and Sam Elliott. They were the real three that helped make this finally come together and happen. And then I raised about a quarter of the budget here in Massachusetts myself, just independent investors. I had read long ago that that's how the Coen brothers put their money together for Blood Simple, and that's how Sam Raimi did it for Evil Dead. And I realized that to get this movie made, nobody was going to necessarily do it for me, but I did have a support team, so I had to go do some of that myself. And we had just barely put enough together so that we could afford all the contracts and paperwork and legal work and LLCs and everything that needs to get generated to make a movie, and had to learn all of those things every step of the way to put the movie together.
It's a great movie. I really enjoyed it. It's wonderful to see Sam Elliott. We've all been huge fans of his throughout his entire career, finally doing some real meaty leading roles lately, which has been great. So what are you working on next, and any plans to tackle any other monsters or myths in the future?
Yeah, I definitely have a couple projects that I've written that tackle monsters and myths, and I think it's a theme that I'm very interested in, and I think that it's something that you'll see arise again in something if I'm allowed to make another film. And that's really up to the people now, because the movie is done. It's not mine anymore. Now it's everyone else's. So it's up to them to decide if this is the types of stories that they want to celebrate coming from filmmakers in this next generation coming up. And I think it's meaningful that RLJ Films, who had just released Mandy, and then Epic Pictures and Patrick Ewald, who is so supportive of this movie, are letting it be the thing that it is, and they're embracing that. And I think that there's something brave about that, because I don't know if that's entirely common in this industry.
No, but I agree with you. Getting a lot of the RLJ films my way, it's a fantastic time for sort of burgeoning semi-indie kind of movies that are being made and put out there, and some really interesting subject matter. So thank you for adding to that. I really enjoyed the film, and we'll actually be reviewing it on our show next week. But thank you ever so much for being on the After Movie Diner today, Bob. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
John, I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too. All the best.
It is